Okay, in this video, I want to look at the latest 7 billion fine-tuned model that is currently topping the Hugging Face leaderboards. And this is NeuralChat by Intel. And there are a number of key things about this model that make it really interesting, apart from it just being a good model. So this is trained on a whole new stack of hardware. It's trained with an interesting mix of data sets, both for supervised fine-tuning and for alignment via DPO, direct preference optimization. So let's jump in and have a look at this model and see, okay, how they've put this together and some of the interesting details about it. So Intel has released a blog post about how they actually made the model. And what they're actually doing is training on their own custom hardware. So for those of you who've been in deep learning a while, may remember back to Intel flirting with custom hardware for inference with the Movidius compute stick. I can remember, I think I still have one of those lying around in my office somewhere. They've tried, a number of ideas. And earlier this year, there were rumors that they were coming out with something that was sort of much more of a competitor to NVIDIA's A100s, H100s. And this seems to be one of the first results of testing this out. So the hardware itself is called the Intel Gaudi 2. It seems to be optimized for training deep learning architectures and also for inference of deep learning architectures. Unfortunately, unlike the Movidius, this is not something that we can just put into our own computers. This chip looks pretty big and looks like it's for, a server config. But it's got some really interesting stats, including the fact that it's got a very large amount of memory on board, which we know is one of the key things that we need for both pre-training and fine-tuning large language models in here. So they seem to have made an extension for Hugging Face, and that's allowed them to benchmark, themselves against NVIDIA for a number of these things. And on the whole, it seems to be performing roughly about, 2x better than an A100 for doing a lot of the training and some of the inference tasks. Another advantage that they seem to have is that unlike Cerebras and a lot of the other chip makers that have been making chips like GraphCore, etc., they've always had problems getting the ops to actually work properly on their hardware to scale up, etc. I still don't know if some of those chip makers fully support all the ops in PyTorch or TensorFlow to this day. It does seem that Intel can get this working with Hugging Face so they can actually fine-tune models for this. So back to this blog post, they've got a full walkthrough of exactly what they did, both from the hardware perspective through to the various training. They used Mistral 7B as their base model, which seems to be the winner for all the current top 7 billion models now, with things like Zephyr, with some of the Hermes models, with the Mistral Orca models, etc. And they've basically used this Intel extension for transformers, which surprisingly, it doesn't seem to be super new. I didn't really know about this before, but this allows them to do things like fine-tuning of all the Llama, a series of models, the MPT models, some of the various FLAN models, etc., and clearly now the Mistral model as well. So in the blog post, they go through both giving you the code and talking about the various data sets that they used. The key data set being this slim Orca data set. So this is a slimmed down version of some of the open Orca data sets. I think we're looking at something just over 500,000 examples in this. According to the overview in here, these seem to be made from the open Orca data set, which was based on the Orca 1 paper. They're all been made from GPT-4. It would be interesting to see when people update some of these data sets with some of the ideas from the Orca 2 paper as well going forward. So we can see that this is not the only models that have been trained on this data set. There's Jackalope, which I like and thought about making a video, just didn't get around to it. Another one, sort of this Mistral Slim Orca 7B in here. Interestingly, though, when we look at the leaderboard, those models are not performing as well as the Intel models. So this makes me wonder what else is it that they've done that's different in here. Some of the key things seem to be that they've added in direct preference optimization. And it seems that Intel have actually made their own Orca DPO pairs in here, which is nice and fantastic that they've contributed this back to the community. So this is a pretty small data set, just under 13,000 examples in here, but they've put this up on Hugging Face. And I imagine that a lot of people are now going to start trying to do DPO on some of the other models using this to see, okay, how much of a bump does this give for the various benchmarks that we've got here. All right, let's jump into the code and have a look at the model itself. Okay, so jumping in the code, we can see that you can load the model pretty easily in here. It doesn't require any remote code or anything like that. You can also load it in 4-bit or 8-bit. I've left that commented out in here. Their prompt format is a little bit old-fashioned, right? It would have been perhaps nice to see them use the ML chat format that now Hugging Face supports quite natively. But their prompt format is basically pass in a system prompt, a user prompt, and then it will give you an assistant reply. So I've just adjusted the generate function to use that. Using a number of different prompts going through this, the results are definitely, very nice for a lot of the standard question and answer sort of stuff. We can see when we look at things like what's the difference between a llama, vicuña, alpaca, that we're still getting this sort of bullet point or numbered list kind of format that Mistral seems to like to do. And I notice that's in a lot of the different fine tunes of Mistral as well, rather than giving prose output. We also see that in the email to Sam Altman about open sourcing the GPT-4 in here. And we see clearly the sort of step-by-step rationale or, reasoning traces from Orca coming out in questions like can Geoffrey Hinton have a conversation with George Washington? The story writing and stuff like that seems to be, quite good. Although I will say that I think the recent E model that I tested from 01.ai is definitely better, but of course it's much, much bigger as well. So it's probably not a fair comparison for this. Sadly, where I think this model lets itself down is in some of the GSM 8K things. You can see here that it starts off doing really well and working out that there probably should be 9 apples left, but then it goes off into combining 9 plus 6 to get 15 apples. That's clearly wrong. It's got a rounding error on the babysitting question, which is okay. I noticed that with these questions, it also seems to answer much more succinctly than the other models. So it makes me wonder, okay, what is causing that? Is that the DPO? The answers don't seem to be in the same sort of quality as both the E model and also the Zephyr model, or even things like Mistral Orca for this. Looking at how much it pays attention to the system prompt, we can see with the email to Sam Altman from a 5-year-old boy, it does seem to be paying attention well to the system prompt. It's very interesting that this sharing is caring is something that has popped up in some of the other fine tunes. So I'm guessing that is coming from the base Mistral model. And perhaps this really does show just the strength of the base Mistral model overall. The email from the vice president, again, we've got this sort of numbered bullet points going through it and a sort of much simpler email perhaps than the E34B chat had on this particular task. Again, it's probably not fair to compare this model against such a bigger model overall. Finally, just to wrap up, the code gen seems quite nice in here, although I've only done a couple of examples of this. So I do wonder, okay, what's causing it to not be as good at the GSM 8K? Perhaps that's just the random luck that I got in the generations that I did in here. Anyway, of course, I'll put the notebook in the description. You can check it out yourself and have a play with this. Let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, I will talk to you in the next video. Bye for now.